Pain. That's how it all starts. Not the blatant, obvious, easy to identify pain, but the one that hides behind routine, that disguises itself as normality. That looks like part of the floor she scrubbed every day. Because in that company, where everything was clean, polished, and expensive, she was the only one who seemed out of place. It was the cleaning lady, the black woman in a navy blue uniform, tight gloves, attentive gaze. No one knew his name. Nobody wanted to know. But she knew. He knew everyone's name. He knew who was late, who lied in the report, who threw confidential documents in the recyclable trash without tearing them. He knew where the contracts were, the forgotten badges, the erased tickets. He knew because he watched and listened, because those who live on the margins learn to read the world from corners where others don't look. Her intelligence had no degree. He had experience. Each room she cleaned was also a listening stage, and not just any listening. It was the kind of listening of those who need to survive, of those who, in order not to be swallowed, need to understand the terrain, the characters, the dangers. She heard the sound of the jumps in the early hours of the morning and knew who they were. He recognized the tone of voice of the bosses through the closed doors. He knew when tension was in the air, and when arrogance turned down to whisper secrets. She pretended not to see. I pretended not to understand, but he wrote everything down inside himself. The words, the patterns, the names. In silence, he put together a puzzle that no one knew existed. Every day, a new piece. On one of those nights, as she pushed her cleaning cart down the hallway of the principal's office, she heard a name, a company, a project, something small, loose, almost irrelevant to anyone else, but not for her. Something in that sentence seemed wrong to him, similar to something I had heard before. But where? While cleaning one of the rooms, her mind went back in time. A few days ago, his daughter had shown him on his cell phone an article about a company involved in corruption. Was it the same name? Seemed, but she wasn't sure. She finished her shift with a full head, heart racing. This was not just another night. It was the beginning of something that she still didn't fully understand, but felt in her skin. Something was wrong, something big, and for the first time, she couldn't leave outside what she heard inside. She didn't know it yet, but that silent listening, ignored by everyone, was about to become the voice that would prevent disaster. Tiredness. The kind of tiredness that comes not only from the body, but from the soul pushed against the wall of silence. This is what she carried in her heart every day, along with the cleaning products in her cart, the weight of being politely ignored. Because in that glass and concrete building, the erasure was wrapped in kindness. Hi, cleaning lady. Always that. Nothing more than that. No name, no recognition. A quick smile, a brief nod, a favor disguised as respect. But no one knew what her name was. No one asked. It was as if it was enough for it to exist to clean up what others left behind, without leaving a trace, without making noise. It was an invisible pact. She cleaned the floor, and they wiped their conscience with automatic gestures. Never a, "How are you?" Never a, "What do you think of this?" Never a, "Are you also part of this here?" There was a clear message in the words spoken and unspoken. Their place is there, serving, fading. The cleaning was physical and symbolic, but there was something that no one noticed. As they erased her presence, she absorbed the essence of the place. He knew who was walking too fast not to cross eyes. She knew who changed his tune when he spoke to her. She knew who treated her with a rehearsed sympathy, one that disappeared when they thought they were alone. She saw the hands that were dirty with power. He saw the eyes that averted when they felt small in front of a black woman with an upright posture. I also saw the broken conversations, the words cut off by her presence. And when she left the room, the laughter returned, as if the world was clean again. Inside, she carried stories that no one told. Stories of women like her, who learned to survive in silence, who had a doctorate in listening to veiled humiliations, and yet they kept going. Not by submission, but by strategy. Because those who live on the margins know there are wars that can only be won when you choose where to spend your voice. It was this choice she made every day, that of listening more than he spoke, that of staying where everyone wanted her not to be, that of resisting with dignity where absence seemed the only option. But that day, as she cleaned the board's desk, a forgotten paper and a memory that came out of nowhere created a spark inside her. A doubt that did not go away, a nuisance that refused to be cleaned. At that moment, without anyone noticing, something stronger than fear began to be born. Suspicion. That's what lit up in her as she wiped the cloth over the glass table in the meeting room. There were scattered papers, open folders, scribbled notes. Nothing out of the ordinary if it weren't for a name printed in bold on one of the forgotten sheets on the table. It was the name of a company, and something about him made her stop. She didn't know where the memory came from, but that name had already crossed her path. At first, he thought it was a coincidence, but as the cleaning continued, her heart tightened. He let his eyes linger a little longer on the document. The information was there, high value, tight deadline, expected signatures. Something inside her said, this is not safe. It was only when he got home that night that he remembered. The daughter, days before, had shown a quick news on her cell phone. She remembered the image, an excerpt from the caption, "Company investigated for involvement in corruption scandal." It was the same, or at least it seemed to be. She was not a lawyer. She was not an auditor. She was just a woman who paid too much attention, because life had never allowed her to ignore the signs. During the night, he did not sleep. He turned over in his mind the pieces of it all, the name, the contract, the memory, and along with the thought came fear. Fear of being wrong, fear of being ridiculed, to hear his voice only to invalidate it, because she knew how it worked. Her opinion wasn't in the script. His listening was not valued. Its existence was of interest only as long as it was silent. Even so, the next day, he returned to work carrying a decision. I would try to warn someone, not because he trusted the system, but because he would not be able to live with the weight of omission. He walked through the corridors with an extra weight on his shoulders. He chose the right time, the right tone. He discreetly approached a supervisor. He said only the essential. There is something strange about this contract. I think you should look at it better. The answer was a condescending smile, one of those smiles that mix surprise with contempt. Thank you for your concern, lady, but everything is under control. And that's it. That was it. An awkward silence, a discomfort slipping down the walls. She withdrew as she entered, without making a sound. That night, while washing the floor of the same room, she heard muffled laughter coming from the pantry. Someone commented on the cleaning lady who knows it. Laughed. They laughed, and she pretended she didn't hear. But inside, something was beginning to break, and that's when she understood. Maybe they didn't want to listen, but time would hear for her. Fear, not the one who screams, but the one who whispers softly as you try to appear firm. It was with this fear that she woke up that day, after the sleepless night, after the crossed words echoing in her head like a bitter refrain. Stuck in cleaner? He wants to show up. He doesn't even know what he's talking about. They hadn't told her that directly, but she felt each syllable stuck in her chest as if they were foam knives, soft on the outside but cruel on the inside. And yet she decided, because there was something in her stronger than fear, something that even she couldn't name, but that pushed her feet back to the company. Maybe it was courage, maybe it was dignity, maybe it was just tiredness of being silenced. Because yes, she knew she would be ridiculed. She knew that the world expected nothing from her, but silence. But that day, she chose to speak. He waited for the right moment. I didn't want an audience. I didn't want a show. I just wanted to be heard by someone who could do something. He waited until the financial coordinator was alone in the room. He knocked lightly on the door, entered with the hood of humility covering his fear, and said, in a voice he barely recognized, "Sorry to bother you, but I think there's something wrong with that new partner's contract. I saw this name in a complaint. It could be just a coincidence, but I thought I should warn you." The coordinator raised her eyes slowly, as if facing a living mistake. He smiled, not with his lips, but with the song of arrogance. He thanked him coldly, said they would investigate, but deep down, the look said it all. "Who do you think you are?" She understood. He left the room with a hot face and a cold chest. The silence kept him company again, like an old acquaintance. In the days that followed, nothing changed. No news about the contract, no conversation in the hallway, no indication that anything had been taken seriously. But she knew what she had done. He knew the risk he had taken. She also knew that, in a way, her voice now existed outside of her, even if ignored, even if dormant. And even though he carried the feeling of having spoken to walls, there was a seed planted in his gesture, a choice made in the face of fear, and a subtle hope that at some point someone would listen, even if it was too late. But what she didn't know was that everything was about to change. Inattention. This is what most tragedies are made of, not of big mistakes, but of small refusals to listen to those who could have made a difference. This is what went around the company's backstage in the days following her warning. Nothing was said to her. No meeting unscheduled. No visible movement. The world went on as if nothing had happened. But behind the curtains, something was moving. Due to a logistical oversight, the legal sector had to review the contract with the new partner before signing. Digital signature delay, absence of an authorization, no big deal. But enough for a junior lawyer, attentive and methodical, to identify an irregularity. A CPF linked to a process. An address crossed with public denunciations. The suspicion gained strength. The internal investigation intensified. The contract was frozen. When the name of the company involved appeared in the compliance reports, the link with the early warning came back to the fore. An internal document. An informal note. There was a previous comment made by a support staff employee. That was how the memory of the warning resurfaced. And the comment, until then ignored, was passed on by someone who finally understood where it had come from the woman in the blue uniform, the one who went unnoticed between meetings and the carpets. No one said anything publicly, but the information spread among the upper layers of the company. The truth does not spread with speed, but with consistency. And that week, she was no longer just the cleaning lady. It became the name whispered between rooms, the starting point of an uncomfortable conversation. How was she the one who saw this first? Gradually, the views on her began to change. They were not yet looks of full respect, but of caution. A different kind of silence surrounded her, not that of exclusion, but that of doubt. Who else in that company would be able to see what no one else saw? Who else would have been ignored? And her? He went about his work as always. No change in your routine. But inside her, something had adjusted. It was no longer about being heard. It was about knowing what I had said, and that the world, even reluctantly, now had to deal with it. In the absence of recognition, it had become recognition itself. And that's when fate wrote its part. Anxiety. That was what tightened her chest when she received the message. A supervisor who rarely spoke to him suddenly appeared near the materials room and said, "The president of the company has asked to speak to you." The phrase came loose, dry, expressionless, and she froze. First the body, then the thoughts. The mind ran to all corners of what I could have done wrong. Had he exaggerated when talking about the contract? Was anyone bothered by his presence in the corridors of the boardroom? Were they finally tired of their curiosity? It was strange, she thought, that only now they wanted to talk to her. Just now, when everything seemed to have cooled down, the stomach turned to stone, hands, sweat. She climbed the floors as one climbs the steps of an invisible judgment. At each step, she relived the times when she was told to be silent, the times when she was taught, with looks and omissions, that her place was silence. When he entered the reception, he did not know whether to sit or run away. I had never stepped into that part of the building with a badge borrowed by the authority. She was called. It entered slowly, and when she saw the CEO's face, she felt something strange. He didn't look angry, nor defensive. There was something in his eyes that she couldn't name. Maybe embarrassment, perhaps admiration, perhaps a mix of the two. "You avoided a disaster," he said, his voice lower than she expected, "and I wanted to thank you personally." She stood still, without reaction. He tried to say that he had only done what he thought was right. He continued. He said that they investigated, that they confirmed the risks, that his speech had avoided a reputational and financial hole of millions. And then he said something she would never forget. "You saw what our experts didn't see. Your listening is worth more than many reports." She didn't know what to answer. I didn't know if I was crying, if I was thanking, if I was apologizing for having dared, but he didn't expect words. He just held out his hand, firmly, and he said he would like to have her in a new position, helping to strengthen the integrity of the company. "We have a lot to learn from you." At that moment, she understood that something had changed, not only in how they saw her, but in what she was finally beginning to see in herself. But there was still something she didn't know, what that new badge would bring with it. Recognition, a word that always seemed distant, almost unreal. For years, she associated this idea with other people, those who had a voice in the corridors, the ones who spoke loudly at the meetings, the ones who could make mistakes and still receive applause. Not her. She learned in silence. I corrected in the dark, and he smiled only when he wasn't too dangerous. But there she was, sitting in the room of the people sector, receiving the official announcement she would be promoted. His new position, Internal Integrity Advisor, a big title, hard to say, but that fit like a glove in the story she carried inside her chest. The company wanted her to help build listening mechanisms, that he formed a committee with plural voices, that he observed where no one else used to look. It wasn't just the position, it was the gesture. A new badge, with his name highlighted. A small room, but yours. A table that now did not need to be cleaned by her, but where she could leave her own documents, her own ideas. For the first time, she saw the world adjust the frame. She, in the center, not as a symbol of forced diversity, but as someone who, in fact, had changed the course of a story. In the official presentation, the CEO did not read a ready-made speech. He just said, "She's done more for the reputation of this company than a lot of people with graduate degrees." Because she listened, and because he had the courage to speak out when everyone else chose to ignore it. The room was full, but the silence after these words was absolute. Not the silence of contempt, but of reverence. In the corridors, the greetings changed. The gazes no longer fled away. People who had never asked her name now called her by the first and last. The words were accompanied by respect, not the cold respect of formalities, but the respect that is born of genuine admiration and of amazement, because there was there, in front of everyone, a black woman who won with the dignity of not having changed who she was. With the new salary, he was able to pay off old debts. She took her daughter to see the sea. He began to plan a technical course, not to prove anything to anyone, but to affirm to herself that there were still paths, there was still time. But there was something she didn't know yet, that her presence in that new role would not only bring structural changes, pride, but not that noisy pride that needs to assert itself all the time. It was a quiet, mature, deep pride, which was born every time she crossed the same corridors where she had previously passed without being noticed. Now, the steps came with another texture. The ground remained the same, but the way the world saw her did not. The new position brought responsibilities, meetings, decisions, documents, but it also brought something that was not in the formal description of the work: representativeness. Not that word used in campaigns, but the one that is built in the eyes of those who recognize you as a mirror. The cleaning women began to observe her with different eyes. First with surprise, then with admiration, finally with confidence. And it was this confidence that changed everything. Instead of awkward silences, low conversations began to emerge during the lunch break. Small outbursts, shared fears, timid alerts, as if she had broken not only a professional barrier, but a spiritual barrier. Suddenly, there was permission to believe that it was possible to occupy another place without having to strip yourself of who you are. Something was formed there, a kind of silent brotherhood, unofficial, not registered, but real. The cleaners have become more than employees. They were now a network of care. They started to warn about risks in the processes, security failures, problems ignored by the management sectors, and little by little she took these warnings to the board, not with fanfare, but with strategy, with the same wisdom with which he always acted. The company began to notice, and not just in the reports, but in the climate, in the results, in the way conflicts were avoided before they turned into fires, all because of a group that, until then, no one listened to. One afternoon, while filling out a form in the pantry, a young assistant, shy with a low voice, approached, and he said, You are the reason I didn't give up in the first week." She smiled, not knowing what to say, because there, at that moment, she realized that her journey was no longer hers alone. She had returned to the place of pain, but now transformed. I no longer carried the weight of proving anything. He carried the lightness of having made his way, and to have done it without having to shout, but also without ever being silent again. And it was then that, when she looked at her badge on the table, she realized that it was not just a printed name. It was a mirror, a symbol, a milestone of everything that no longer fit into oblivion. But one last choice was still missing, and she knew that this one, yes, would change everything. It was not a career choice, nor of position. It was a choice of symbol, to close, and it was in silence that she decided how she would mark it. It was not planned. They called her to give a testimony about the new integrity program. They expected institutional phrases, protocol thanks. But she no longer fit into this script. When he took the microphone, he didn't read anything. She looked at the faces in front of her, many of whom had previously looked away when she passed by with the cleaning cart, and said only what needed to be said. I'm not here for a miracle. I'm here because I was insistent on what I heard, even when no one wanted to listen. Listen more. There are people with a lot to say where no one pays attention. And sometimes, it's that voice that saves everything. There was no immediate applause, because what she said was not applaudable. It was absorbable. It hurt those who understood. It freed those who saw themselves. He touched deeply on those who had already been too silent. When the first clapping sounded, it was not celebration. It was gratitude. As he left the auditorium, he walked silently through the corridors. The same ones she had already walked through as a shadow now greeted her with respect. But she didn't stop to receive compliments. He was not looking for an audience. He passed by the old pantry, where he had kept so many swallowed words. She passed through the entrance where she had already been barred with suspicion. She stopped in front of the mirror in the women's bathroom where she had so often wiped away hidden tears. And there, in that serene reflection, he saw his mother, your grandmother. He saw all the ones that came before, and they had no voice, but they left him strength. From inside the bag, he took out something he had been carrying for months. His old badge, the first, the one from when no one knew his name. He held it for a moment. He took a deep breath, and he left it on the sink, next to a handwritten note. Don't be afraid to speak. But, above all, don't be afraid to listen. He left without haste. There was no more hurry, because now time was on her side, and even without asking for anything in return, she had received everything: dignity, respect, voice. But most important of all, she had opened a door that would never be closed again. And whoever saw that forgotten badge on the sink might not even understand. But anyone who knew the story would know. That was the final gesture. The silence that speaks louder than any speech. And there, in that silence, she rested. If this story touched you, don't let it stop here. Subscribe to the channel to strengthen Black narratives with protagonism and truth. Let your like feel proud. Comment if you have experienced something similar, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that dignity is also heritage. Here, each story is a mirror, and each click, a step towards the representation we deserve.